how to hypnotize. The dangers. I learned hypnosis using clinical and self-help books, all of which warned against the dangers of stage hypnosis. Probably few of you will be interested in using hypnosis as a performance piece, but it is worth looking at the issues involved so that you can understand how best to use it responsibly if you decide to use it at all. The Campaign Against Stage Hypnotism, or CASH, was founded after a young girl died from an epileptic seizure some hours after she participated in a hypnotism show. While the process of hypnotism does not cause fatal epileptic attacks, it was argued that a suggestion given to the girl to experience a huge electric shock on stage set off a phobic reaction she had to electricity, resulting in the epileptic fit later that evening. The hypnotist was not held responsible in court as no direct causality could be inferred. Perhaps understandably, the girl's family felt that the case was not treated with the appropriate seriousness, and they still campaign against what they see as a potentially dangerous form of entertainment. A common argument against the culpability of the hypnotist runs as follows. If you went to see a ventriloquist and then crashed your car on the way home or complained of headaches, you would not blame the ventriloquist. If you died in the crash, your distraught family would not seek to put an end to ventriloquism. Stage hypnotists and many clinical hypnotists argue that because hypnosis is merely tapping into people's potential for role-playing and compliance, it cannot be held responsible for untoward events that happen following a show. Speaking from my own experience, I'm reminded of an incident when I performed a hypnosis show at a freshers' ball in Bristol many years ago. It was my local students' union, and I had performed there several times. When I invited participants onto the stage that night, I noticed that one girl who had come up was clearly very drunk. As people in such a condition make poor subjects, I asked her to return to her seat before I continued with the demonstration. A couple of hours after the show, I was meandering around in what is apparently the largest and ugliest students' union in Europe, making the most of my VIP pass, when I heard an announcement over the tannoy system, "Will the hypnotist please come down to the foyer immediately?" I duly left Kajagoogoo's dance floor and hurried down to the reception area. A crowd had already gathered, and I was ushered by a St. John's ambulance official to the centre of the throng, and there on the floor was the girl I'd sent back to her seat, apparently unconscious. "I'm told she was on stage with you," one of the medical crew said to me, and I answered that indeed she had been, although she hadn't been hypnotised. Still, they thought I should have a go at bringing her out of what might be a hypnotic trance. I offered to have a go, although I knew it had nothing to do with me, so in front of 100 or so students I tried to talk her out of a trance, as if she was in one, and obviously failed, and by that time an ambulance had arrived and she was taken away. I found out some weeks later that she'd passed out due to severe alcohol poisoning, and had had her stomach pumped at the hospital. Apparently, she nearly died. I immediately began to wonder what would have happened if she had died. And as awful as that would have been, I also knew that her parents would have been told that I'd hypnotised her and hadn't been able to bring her out of it. I was young, and there are no qualifications for being a stage hypnotist. That certainly would have been the end of my career, just because she'd drunk too much. As it was, I was never hired there again, not even to do magic tricks. Every stage hypnotist has to deal with this sort of thing, and whether the fatality that sparked the campaign was really connected with the hypnotism to the extent that the hypnotist should be blamed is something that will never be ascertained. However, I do think that the question of responsibility is an important one. Stage hypnotists are understandably very eager to defend themselves by saying that it's all fun and make-believe and no damage can be caused. I don't think that's quite right, even though I largely agree with the behavioural approach to understanding these performances. The problem stems from the nature of the shows. Sadly, it's not difficult to perform stage hypnosis, and many people are attracted to it who clearly have no sense of taste or responsibility. While it may be hysterical to see your friends stripping to music blaring from a ghetto blaster in the corner of a pub, or grown men crying like babies because they think they've just watched the saddest film in the world, this unfortunate focus on embarrassment and low-level humour brings with it certain issues. Primarily, the hypnotist is unlikely, even if he knew how to in the first place, to be at all sensitive to any discomfort shown by his participants. And at the end of the show, he will probably want to lose them quickly from the stage without taking care to make sure they're completely happy and feeling fine. If a subject has been humiliated on stage, or has any reason to resent the hypnotist or find the show upsetting in retrospect, it's quite understandable that she might complain of after effects such as depression or paranoia. If, perhaps after a few drinks and trying to keep up with rapid repeated sleep and wake instructions, she feels like a confused and disorientated human yo-yo, she might develop headaches or keep falling asleep after the show is over. Equally, it may be that one of the instructions given on stage and dutifully carried out by the subject with strong emotional involvement in front of a baying audience has left the subject feeling disturbed. During a television investigation for and against stage hypnotism, one woman told of how she'd been instructed on stage to look everywhere for her breast, which she couldn't find, and she searched in a state of urgency and worry, imaginatively acting out the instruction and really getting into her role. She spoke afterwards of the traumatic scenario of trying to communicate her panic at the time to her husband, only to find out that he just laughed along with everybody else and didn't help her. She was seemingly left with a haunting fear that she might have to have a mastectomy one day and that her husband would find the whole thing hysterical. The irony is that a hugely entertaining hypnotic demonstration could be carried out without recourse to embarrassment or crudity. In fact, from my experience, a vicarious sense of embarrassment felt by the audience only weakens the show, although of course this depends on your audiences. Personally, I find it excruciating to be sat in an audience that is screaming with laughter at the plight of some poor chap on stage who is clearly upset at some suggested event. As this subjective question of taste is too closely related to the question of avoiding dangerous scenarios, I find it difficult to consider objectively what the best approach to regulating stage hypnosis should be, but certainly it seems wrong that the argument of hypnosis isn't real, in inverted commas, should absolve the hypnotist of all responsibility towards the welfare of his participants. If a hypnotist were able to say to the audience, "If you come up, please just play along with everything," it might be argued that the subject should then be responsible themselves. However, given that he's going to manipulate, bully, or cajole rather vulnerable people into anything from playing along to really living out what he suggests, and in a way that might be very confusing or unsettling for them, there is a sense in which one should not just immediately decide that he can walk away from any duty of care. Now, perhaps one might argue that according to that logic, a magician should then be held responsible if a participant in a card trick takes the magic way too seriously and loses so much sleep following the performance that he develops an illness. However, this would be a very unusual case, and clearly a reasonable person would not be expected to react in that way. In our hypnotism scenario, though, it's more understandable that a participant might leave the show troubled if handled unprofessionally. Understanding the issue in terms of the common-sense, sensitive handling of volunteers, rather than debating whether hypnotism itself is to blame, does allow the conscientious performer to steer a safe course. If you decide to look seriously into learning hypnotism, I advise you to fully take on board the following. Number 1. Do not try to hypnotize anyone who is clearly disturbed or has epilepsy. If in any doubt, just don't. Avoid anyone with any history of mental illness. Number 2. Do not get involved in therapeutic change unless you are suitably qualified. Plenty who are qualified probably shouldn't be doing it, so you certainly shouldn't get involved. 3. Treat hypnosis as a gentle tool, not as anything dramatic or showy. Leave the theatrics till you know how to make people comfortable with you and you really know what you're doing. Number 4. Everything you do contributes to the hypnosis. Imagine that the person is hypersensitive to his surroundings. If you or other people present appear flustered in the face of an unexpected response, such as the subject not waking up when he's supposed to, your subject might well start panicking himself and not feel he can wake up. 5. Always make sure at the end that the person is completely free from any belief that they might still be hypnotized. His belief is everything. There is only his belief. If he leaves thinking he's still half under, he will be. Take your time to bring people thoroughly out of the trance, in inverted commas. 6. Take it slowly, and only try it in a controlled environment. And 7. Treat it first as a relaxation tool, and slowly move into administering behavioral suggestions. Language. Pacing and leading. Hypnosis is based primarily on the understanding of pacing, or feeding back the subject's experience to him, and then leading him to the new desired behavior. Consider, for example, the difference in your reaction to the following statements. Listen carefully to each, and note your response to them. Number 1. You want to scratch. Number 2. As you sit there, and as you, despite your environment, really focus on these words, And as you continue to listen, and the more you try not to think about it, the more you'll notice the increasing feeling of wanting to scratch. The first example is an outright command to scratch, and you may or may not decide to scratch on the basis of it. In the second, however, the desired action, scratch, is now connected to things you are already doing, sitting there, listening to these words, trying not to scratch. It just gets under your skin more, doesn't it? And as you sit there feeling all the itches starting to tickle in different places on your body, you'll notice that this sort of language has a much more seductive quality to it. The simplest form of pacing and leading, and I'm still scratching at this point, is this. As you X, so you Y. The first piece of behaviour, X, is something that is known to be true. It might refer to how the subject is seated or what he's looking at or what you know he'll be experiencing in his head. The desired behaviour, Y, is connected with it as if the two are somehow interdependent. Sometimes a hypnotist will include several pieces of pacing, X, before sneaking in a lead, Y, such as you sit there and listen to my words with your eyes closed, feeling your hands there on the arm of the chair, just allowing my words to relax you as your breathing becomes regular and peaceful, I'd like you to let yourself begin to drift away into a kind of sleep. There are two examples of leading statements hidden in the above. The most obvious one is the I'd like you to let yourself begin to drift away into a kind of sleep. But the other is allowing my words to relax you. Everything up to the word chair is simply feeding back to the subject what the hypnotist is observing. Then, the idea of his words relaxing the subject is snuck in, along with those items of pure feedback, so that it is accepted as something equally self-evident. Listen to it again. As you sit there and listen to my words with your eyes closed, feeling your hands there on the arm of the chair, allowing my words to relax you as your breathing becomes regular and peaceful, I'd like you to let yourself begin to drift away into a kind of sleep. And now consider the following as you imagine dangling a watch in front of a subject's face. And as you listen to my voice and look up at the watch, watching it as you relax in the chair, you'll notice that your eyes start to grow heavy as you listen to me. That's right. And as you notice them blinking, so too you can keep listening to me as you relax and as you allow them to grow heavier. And as the rest of you relaxes in the chair, so your eyes get heavier, and you blink more and more just to allow them to close, so that you can drift off into a sleep. So here, the only fact that you know is that if a subject looks up at any dangling object, the muscles in his eyes will grow a little tired, or his eyes will smart, and he'll want to blink. That's all. However, all the as-yous that link the idea of blinking with the action of looking at the watch and eventually drifting off makes it very easy for the subject to think, it's working, my eyes are getting heavier, I must be drifting off, and to follow along with the statements being made, despite the fact that to an onlooker, it looks as if you have just made someone go to sleep through some sort of hypnotic power. You can start to realize that in fact you're only guiding your subjects down an easy path to what you want them to experience. You're not making them do anything. Think of it like a seduction. Pacing and leading are used in many forms of persuasion. Good teachers and communicators know how to respond to a bad suggestion from a classroom or boardroom with something like, yep, that's a great idea, and I think where that really works is X, that's picking out a positive aspect of the bad idea. I think also that Y, now shifting across to a better idea as if it had grown out of the bad suggestion. Here the person doesn't feel disregarded, even though his idea really had no value. He has been paced, and then led into a better idea, which he might even think he came up with. A common technique used by effective teachers, particularly good English teachers, upon being given a wrong answer in class, is to act as if the child has spotted something at some deeper level than that at which the subject was being discussed. The teacher can then lead around to the desired answer without making the child feel stupid. A hypnotic session will be typically led by this process throughout, and the hypnotist will often minimize the effect of any unexpected noises or disturbances by referring to them, pacing, and then suggesting that they will enhance the trance state, leading. As in, the sound of the telephone relaxing you more, or as the sound of those sirens helps you drift away, etc. Presupposition. Here we hide the instruction we'd like the subject to pick up on by presupposing it to be the case. Consider, for example, the case of the clever parent who wants her child to go to bed by 8:30. She might offer the double bind, "You've been really good today, so you can decide whether to go to bed at 8 or 8:30. The child, of course, chooses the latter, happily, whereas the words, "You have to go to bed at 8:30 today," would probably not have been met with the same compliance. Presupposition also tends to be a fault of leading questions that can interfere with the fairness of such things as market research and the reliability of eyewitness reports in police interviews. In a classic demonstration, students are asked to watch a film involving a car accident. They're then asked, "How fast do you think the car was going when it passed the barn?" Or, "How fast was the white sports car travelling when it hit the bus?" In fact, there was no barn, and the car was not white. But in formulating their answers, many of the students will report afterwards remembering a white sports car or a barn featuring in the film. In hypnosis, a sentence such as, "You'll notice that your eyes start to grow heavy as you listen to me," is also a useful presupposition. It presupposes that the eyes are growing heavy, and only questions when the subject will happen to notice it. It's a bit like the old Kellogg's cornflakes slogan, "Have you forgotten how good they taste?" Or, "Do you still have sex with your dog?" Both presuppose what the speaker wants to communicate by questioning something peripheral to the real message. This technique can allow the hypnotist to suggest an action without eliciting a negative response. Saying, for example, "You can wonder how deeply you're going into trance," nicely presupposes that they are going into trance, whatever that is, and it may have the effect on the listener of relaxing him even more by having him believe that he is sinking deeper into some special state. "As you sit there, I want you to notice that your body is growing heavier." Nicely combines pacing, leading, and a presupposition. "As you sit there, I want you to notice that your body is growing heavier." The presupposition is that the body is indeed getting heavy, and it would seem to be more effective than the command, "Your body is getting heavy." Outside Hammer horror movies, such direct language is rarely used nowadays. Tone of voice. Practice talking with a gentle, relaxed tone, which will enhance the trance. If you sound harsh, you won't be as effective. Find phrases that trip mellifluously off the tongue, such as enhance the trance, and let them provide texture and a sense of dreaminess to the experience. Repeat yourself, and allow yourself to fully relax as you talk, so that the subject naturally relaxes with you. Use of imagery. Appeal to all the senses of your subject by referring to things you'd like them to see, hear, feel, smell, or even taste in their hypnotic state. If you have your subject imagine a garden, have him see it vividly, but also refer to the feel of the grass under his feet, the sound of the birds in the trees, even the smell of the flowers. Only when these things are multisensory will they seem potent and real. Be sure to allow the subject to fill in the gaps as he wishes, but be careful not to contradict something about a picture you might have suggested. His image of the garden may be quite different from yours. You might refer to a brook which you imagine to be in the garden, but he might have decided to lose himself in a real garden from his childhood, which contains no such brook. Such errors will normally cause confusion and probably bring him out of the trance a little. And I'll continue in this to use the word trance as if it were a real thing. The word is, however, just a shorthand term for whatever that half-acted-out state of compliance is that the subject enters whenever he follows the hypnotist's suggestions. Structure. Think of practicing hypnosis as learning how to induce a profound state of relaxation in a person brought about by suggestion. Once that state is induced, people will show varying degrees of suggestibility, which seems to tie in with how responsive they are in everyday life. Think of the following stages as a framework. Number 1. Prepare the subject and induce light stages of trance. This may involve the suggestion of eye closure. Step 2. Deepen the trance through a metaphor such as going down the stairs. Step 3. Carry out your hypnotic work. 4. Fully awaken the subject. What number 3 consists of, carrying out your hypnotic work, will depend on what you're doing. For one hypnotist, it will be suggestions of being able to recreate the trance in the future and creating a mental space where the subject can go to profoundly relax. Another might use it to help the subject find ways of stopping smoking. A stage hypnotist might use it to suggest ludicrous behaviors that the subject will exhibit when he wakes up. This latter case is known as post-hypnotic suggestion, and for that we would have to add a 5th stage to the list. Step 5. At the very end of the session, make sure that the subject is free of any suggestion and assured that he is no longer hypnotically responsive. Here's what I suggest you do if you wish to learn this. Listen through this, and then record an induction to try with yourself. Find out what works well for you and what doesn't, as the chances are that those same things will work or not work for other people too. Not wanting to be responsible for every schoolboy who listens to this and tries to hypnotize his classmates, I shall not give a verbatim script for you to use, but rather pointers that you can put together and try out. With this in mind, and now that you also understand the basic approach to language and instruction, let's go back through those stages in more detail. Prepare your subject. So prepare means to have your subject sitting comfortably, ready to relax. While there's no need for soft music or a dark room, it is best to avoid bright lights or noisy surroundings. Where possible, take the phone off the hook, switch off mobiles, make sure that you won't be disturbed for half an hour or so. Your subject should ideally be open to whatever will happen. They don't need to believe in hypnosis. Not too nervous, but not bouncily over-enthusiastic either. Bear in mind that you're not really inducing a special state, although you'll talk as if you are. Instead, you're utilizing the subject's expectations and beliefs. So if you appear unconvinced at the start that he will be a good subject, the chances are that he won't respond well. You must be confident, unflustered, and act as if you've done it 100 times before, even if you haven't. Inducing light stages of trance. Method 1. Tension and release. This is a simple, direct way of kicking off a hypnotic session. It works well with groups where one-on-one suggestions would take too long, as would waiting for each person to drift off. Have the subject close his eyes and tense up every muscle in his body. Tell him to make sure that he keeps breathing normally, but to tense the muscles in his feet, his legs, stomach, chest, shoulders, arms, and fists. Have him hold it like that, then tell him to relax. And as he relaxes, there'll be a certain response you know that he'll experience. You can pace the fact that his body will grow heavier in the chair, then lead this into behaviors you want at this stage. For example, and as your body grows heavier and your breathing becomes relaxed and regular, so too you can listen to me as you sink down in the chair and let yourself start to drift off comfortably. Method 2. Eye closure. Alternatively, have your seated subject look up at a point near the top of a wall in front of him. This is to make sure that his eyes are looking upwards, but not uncomfortably. Instruct him to relax as he looks at that point. This is a classic clinical induction used by many therapists, who sometimes like to use an odd or flamboyant object to induce the trance in this way, rather than just a spot on the wall. Pace the fact that he's sitting there, listening to you, looking at that object, and lead into the desired behavior. This is like the watch example earlier. Use the same sort of language. You know that eventually his eyes will grow a bit tired and want to blink, so don't be frightened to predict that behavior, but instead make it sound like the onset of a trance in your seamless flow of layered suggestions. As he listens to you and looks at the wall, so too he can allow that relaxation to spread over his body, and allow his eyes to grow comfortably heavy as he continues to sit there, and as he feels his arms on the chair, he can feel his eyelids wanting to close, and as they blink, he can allow himself to relax more into a nice trance, and so on. Deepen the trance. Remember, there is no real trance to deepen. However, the idea of going deeper into a special state is easy for the subject to visualize and engages his imagination in the right way. So once you can see that the subject is a little slumped, has his eyes closed and is clearly relaxed, you need to amplify that relaxation. The easiest way is to have him imagine himself at the top of a staircase. Tell him that each step down will relax him more and take him deeper into the sleep. This is a good point to allow for any future confusion the subject might experience. He's not going to become a zombie and will remain aware of what you're saying throughout. If he expects actually to fall asleep or to experience something extraordinary, he'll be disappointed and might decide that it isn't working. Again, we see that the importance lies in working with the subject's belief, for he must be convinced that he is indeed going into a trance and that everything is proceeding as planned. So it's a good idea to tell the subject that as he finds himself going deeper into the trance, he will still hear and understand everything that you say, and will be aware of himself going into the trance. This phrase nicely utilizes the fact that he will remain aware of what's happening and focuses that awareness on a useful aspect of the proceedings. Tell him you will count from 1 to 10 as he walks down the stairs, and that when you reach 10, he'll be at the bottom of the stairs and in a profound state of relaxation. Have him walk down and pace everything that's happening, as I count, as you take each step and as you breathe and as you listen to me, so each step, each number, each word can take you deeper. Carry out your hypnotic work. For now, let's use this staircase to create a useful place for our subject to return to whenever he likes. This will also allow you to practice well without worrying about failure. At the bottom of the stairs, tell him to see a door in front of him. Explain that this door leads out to a beautiful garden, a perfect idyllic setting that will be his very own to return to whenever he wants. Tell him to take hold of the door handle and to get ready to open it. Now instruct him to go through, and immediately begin to describe a multi-sensory experience while allowing him to find details for himself. Don't talk about paths or specific components of the garden, or if you do, clarify you want him to place those things in there. Remember to include the things he can feel, hear, and even smell. Tell him to feel the warmth of the sun on his face, and the gentle breeze that keeps the temperature to the perfect level. Emphasize that he should make this garden as delightful as possible, so that he can relish coming back here whenever he wants. Introducing physical suggestions. One good way of testing the responsiveness of your subject is to now suggest some physical behaviors that will provide you with feedback and help you deepen the trance even more. Suggest that there's a nice chair in the garden, in just the perfect spot, and that he should go and sit in it. Have him then notice that his right arm is very heavy, so heavy that he can imagine it stuck to the arm of the chair. Have him imagine a force binding his arm to the arm of the chair, and then have him try and lift it in a way that presupposes failure on his part. For example, the words, "try as hard as you can to unstick your arm," create a powerful suggestion. Now he's putting effort into trying, which presupposes that he won't be able to do it, and the words "stick your arm" will effectively echo in his mind. He may at this point A. lift the arm in the air, B. struggle to lift it but fail, or C. sit motionless as if he's putting no effort into it at all. Option B suggests the best type of subject, and is the clearest and most useful pointer to you that he is responsive. Where he does not move at all, you can presume that he's so relaxed that he's taken the suggestion to mean that he simply can't summon up the effort even to try. If he just lifts his arm, he'll hopefully at least find it heavy, in which case treat it like a success, and say, "Excellent," and as you notice how oddly heavy that arm has become, let it take you down, now, even deeper, into that state, as you bring it back down and just let go and relax. And see what you did? You're even acknowledging his confusion or tension, which might have resulted from it not working, and offering him a chance to let go and relax by going deeper into the trance. He should accept this with relief and go with it, even if you find that he's not a terrific subject. If this suggestion has proved successful, and you want to take things further, now tell him that his other arm is getting lighter. Have him imagine a helium balloon tied to his left wrist, and all the natural heaviness draining out of his arm, as he starts to notice how light it is becoming. Presuppose the increasing weightlessness, talk about it becoming lighter and lighter, and have him wait for it to start moving up in the air all on its own. When the instruction is to allow the hand to rise slowly into the air and mixed with plenty of pacing, this can be a very effective suggestion. Because you're working against the natural heaviness of the hand following all the relaxation that has taken place, this might take a while to get going. However, it's important to be constantly encouraging, so remember to pick up on every movement that happens and build on it, incorporating it into the pacing. Pace the feeling of the hand coming away from the arm of the chair. Pace and lead and presuppose that hand into the air. If the hand twitches its way upwards, tell him to wait for the next twitch that will send it rising. Let him feel that it's really working, and it will. When the hand is risen, as high as you feel it will go, you can then have the subject allow it to come down, and in doing so suggest that he will sink deeper into the trance. The relief that the subject feels as the arm levitation concludes is enough to make this deepening technique very effective. When you find that you can make this work well, you can use it as a way of starting the induction from a waking state. I would generally use this arm levitation at the start of a session, as it can be very convincing for the subject and a nice way for me to tell how responsive he is. I have the subject keep his eyes open as his hand comes up to his face, and then have him close his eyes and drift into a sleep as it comes back down again. When the hand first moves, he'll often laugh or express surprise, but by the time it's picked up speed and come up to the face, he should appear dazed and dreamy. My levitation instructions are accompanied by a flow of suggestions that he need not drift off into a profound and comfortable trance until that hand touches you on the face and your eyes can finally close properly. That's a massive and layered presupposition that the trance will occur and that the eyes will meanwhile grow heavier and heavier and close as a final expression of relief. As we're using this session and the imaginary garden to offer our subject a useful technique to use himself whenever he likes, we must also explain to him now that he can recreate the trance for himself. Have him lie on the grass in the garden and recreate all the wonderful feelings and sensations that accompany it. Then tell him that by finding a quiet time when he'll be undisturbed, he can close his eyes and imagine that staircase once again. Explain that by imagining going down the stairs and through the door, he'll be able to return to the garden and enjoy the benefits of the relaxation it offers. He can use this to recharge, to clear his head, or to help him get to sleep. He can use it while revising for an exam, as it may help him to review his revised material in such a relaxed state. Talk him back through the procedure and also assure him that when he uses this on his own, he'll be able to open his eyes and wake up whenever he wants. Finally, emphasize the importance of his using this regularly at first in order to lock it into the mind. If he neglects it, it'll be difficult to bring back. Fully awakening the subject. The final stage is to bring the subject fully out of the state and make sure that he is fully refreshed. I would have him imagine walking through the door and back up the stairs as I count back from 10 to 0, and this will further cement in his mind the idea that he can go back down at a later date to return to the garden. Explain that as he walks up the stairs, he will feel all the drowsiness and the heaviness leave him, but that he need not open his eyes until he reaches 0, which will be at the top. Then slowly take him back up the stairs and allow your voice to become more natural and chatty as you reach the very top. Instruct him to open his eyes and be fully wide awake. Use this time to get further feedback from the subject. Was the garden real for him? What did it feel like? And ask him how long he felt it took. A good subject will tend to think it took far less time than it did. It's not uncommon for an hour-long session to feel like 10 minutes. Reiterate the importance of using the self-hypnotic technique regularly until he can slip into it easily, and you are done. Trying a post-hypnotic suggestion. Once all this is second nature, you may wish to experiment with a post-hypnotic suggestion. To do this, you'll first need to find a good, responsive subject and have him primed to go quickly back into trance. This is because you'll only be putting him to sleep, as it were, in order to give him the suggestion, and then you'll wish to awaken him so that he will carry it out. A much smaller percentage of subjects are responsive enough to carry out bizarre post-hypnotic suggestions than those who will demonstrate arm levitation and so on during the trance. Do not think of administering post-hypnotic suggestions as a mini-stage show. Your subject will likely be fully aware of the fact that he's carrying them out, so treat it with a sense of exploration and sensitivity. Some suggestions will work better than others. An energetic type might happily carry out suggestions that involve movement, but you're unlikely to have people jumping around thinking chairs are boiling hot unless you are in front of an audience and appealing to the subject's extrovert nature. Firstly, the subject needs to understand that he will go back into the sleep when you tell him to. You can give this as a post-hypnotic suggestion, i.e., when I click my fingers and tell you to sleep, you'll go straight back down into the trance. Each time he then does this, he builds up a stronger responsive pattern to your instructions, which allows for more demanding suggestions to be given. Equally, you can tell him that he can come out of the trance easily and fully refreshed when you count backwards to 0 each time. Make sure that he is indeed quite awake every time that you do this. I would suggest that you try out the following post-hypnotic suggestion to have the subject forget his own name, but only when the procedure to this point has become second nature. Note how the instructions are worded, the pacing and leading, the repetition of the central suggestion, the reference to how the subject will react at the moment when he is asked, and the relating of it to ordinary life experiences which help it take root. The words are not magical and can of course be changed, but this is a good example of making them persuasive. I would also suggest that you try this when there are a few people present, as the pressure to comply is greater in a group. When you wake up, you won't be able to remember your name. The more you try to remember it, the more you will forget. Just like all of those things that you try to remember but find impossible, all of those things that are right on the tip of your tongue, but they get further and further away the more you try to remember them. In the same way that you forget a tune or a name, you'll have no recollection of your name when you awake. When I ask you what it is, you won't be able to remember, will you? The more you try, the more you'll forget. All memory of your name will be gone the moment you open your eyes. Then awaken him from the state by counting backwards to 0. Ask him his name, but frown and use a tone of voice to suggest that he can't recall it. Look puzzled yourself. Shake your head as you ask him to try to remember, thereby cueing him to fail. Remain in control. If it doesn't work, don't worry. Try with different people on different occasions and see how they respond. Where post-hypnotic suggestions have been given, they can be cleared, simply by having the subject believe that they are cleared. As they don't exist outside his belief and responsiveness to the ideas that you give him, they're much easier to take away than to give. However, it's always a good idea to re-hypnotize the person at the end and tell him that upon awakening he will no longer be hypnotized, will remember his name, and be free from suggestion. This is, necessarily, a very brief guide to the basics of hypnosis. Please use it tentatively and with sensitivity, and with time you will come to grasp its nature. Personally, I have dispensed with formal hypnosis and come to utilize the communication techniques I feel lie behind its effectiveness. I use people's capacity for compliance and imaginative engagement to achieve certain aims when I perform. Equally, I can use it quite dramatically and instantaneously. I think, though, that these things are best discovered over time by a person with serious interest who is prepared to pursue a certain amount of study. Now, one final word of warning. I would be wary of the large number of so-called hypnotic courses in inverted commas sold in downloadable format on the net. Some of the individuals who sell these are utterly reprehensible, especially those who use my name to peddle their wares, of course. At the moment, there are any number of e-books and so on supposedly teaching my techniques. They do not, regardless of what they claim. Don't waste your money.